The world was not born in the light. It crawled out of a bloody pulp and primordial chaos conceived in the roar of torn flesh. When young Zeus, scorched by ambition and a thirst for power, raised a knife against his own father Cronus, the sky above the world choked on ash for 10 long years. Titanomachy. It was a slaughter of titanic proportions, where the earth cracked under the blows of gods and the oceans boiled from spilled blood. Most of the Titans, blinded by their own monumental pride and animalistic faith in their strength, blindly followed Cronus into this hell. But Prometheus, son of the Titan Iapetus, carried a curse within him. Foresight. His mind saw the future as a pre-written, bloody sentence. He clearly understood the primal force was doomed to fall before the new order Zeus was bringing. Prometheus watched his kin crumble. Standing amidst the smoking ruins, he begged his father Iapetus and his brother Atlas to stop, begged them not to throw themselves into this hopeless meat grinder. But in response, he heard only the hoarse laughter of those who believed themselves the immortal masters of the universe. Then Prometheus made a choice. In the age of tyrants, there is no room for familial sentiment, only pragmatism. He stepped over the future corpses of his tribesmen and defected to Olympus. His precise advice, calculated with ruthless accuracy, became Zeus's saving grace in the darkest hours of the war. It was this cold intellect that told the future Thunderer to descend into the stinking depths of Tartarus to unleash the 100-handed Hecatonchires and the Cyclopes, whose hammer forged the first lightning bolts, the weapon of future terror. The war ended exactly as Prometheus had foreseen, with the total collapse of the old world. Cronus and his loyalists, mutilated and bleeding, were cast down into the bottomless maw of Tartarus. But with the fall of the old Titan, the former world perished too. The new master Zeus, with his very first word, tore apart the gentle warmth that had reigned for centuries. He carved time into 4 pieces, letting the icy breath of death, winter, into the universe for the first time. The air calcified with frost, and the earth crusted with rime and went numb. It was the dawn of a new era. Prometheus's brother Atlas was sentenced by the new lord of the sky to an exquisite torture. Now he was to forever hold the icy weight of the heavenly vault upon his shoulders, feeling every vertebra crack under the mass of the universe. As for Prometheus himself, Zeus brought him close to his throne, making him his first counselor. But this alliance was poisoned from the start. Zeus was erecting a tyranny where the only law was his capricious, cruel wrath. Prometheus, whose intellect demanded creation, not mere destruction, quickly grew nauseated by the gilded Olympus, a crypt where the newly minted gods drank themselves blind on their own impunity, feasting on the bones of the old world. Part 1. Creation from Ash and the Great Deception. The earth after the war lay a silent, scorched wasteland. Zeus, indifferently surveying this deadscape, tasked Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus with populating this crypt with new creatures. Epimetheus tackled the job chaotically, planning nothing. He haphazardly scattered the gifts of the gods. Lions got the razor of claws and insatiable strength, eagles, piercing sight and wings that sliced the air, hares the agility of despair, and bears a thick armor of fur against the winter frost. When it was time to forge man, it turned out the sack of divine gifts was empty. Epimetheus had squandered it all. Man came into the world as a naked, helpless pile of meat, stripped of fangs, shells, or claws. He was the weakest abortion of this world, doomed to rot in the first damp crevice he found. Then Prometheus took it upon himself to fix his brother's mistake. He walked over to a puddle, scooped up cold, gray clay, kneaded it with the poisoned blood of the Titans, and sculpted an image of the gods. Prometheus wasn't looking for love or solace in these creatures. His cold mind demanded a force capable of standing against the will of Olympus. In Zeus's ultimate tyranny, the Titan remained an outsider whose lease on safety expired more with every passing year. Humans were meant to be his own hidden foundation, a mortal horde that did not belong to the new gods and could one day become a crack in the monolith of the new regime. He forced this creature to look not down at the damp earth like animals, but up at the cold, indifferent stars, breathing into its chest the eternal ache of unattainable desires. The human race multiplied, but it was a pathetic sight. They wandered the thickets, huddled in damp, dark burrows, knowing neither law nor the passage of time. Fire to these beings was not a friend. It was a punitive, untamed element of Olympus. When Zeus's lightning torched the forests, people fled in terror, staring at the flames as an all-consuming monster that brought only death. Mortals didn't know how to wield it. They only knew how to fear it. Zeus looked down on them from his heavenly peak with profound contempt. To him, they were a ringworm on the body of his new kingdom, and he was already prepping them for total extermination. If humanity perished, Prometheus would be left alone with the Thunderer's sickly paranoia, stripped of his only foothold. To draw the line between the ruthless masters and their mute slaves, a grand assembly was called on the scorched plains of Mecone. It had to be decided what cut of the sacrifices this wild human herd was obligated to surrender to Olympus. Prometheus understood. If the gods took all the marrow, his creation would simply starve out before it ever managed to become a solid counterweight to the heavenly throne. The Titan decided to play a dangerous game. He slaughtered a sacrificial bull, butchering its carcass into two opposing natures. On one side, Prometheus tossed the juicy, nourishing meat and entrails, but deliberately wrapped this wealth in the filthy, reeking hide of the animal, a sight that commanded disgust. Meanwhile, the naked, worthless bones the Titan masterfully draped in a thick, gleaming layer of white fat, sparkling so lavishly under the sun, hiding a void beneath. The deception complete, Prometheus approached Zeus, and with a barely perceptible venomous smile, declared that the great lord of the sky had the right to choose first what was worthy of his majesty. Zeus swallowed the bait in a heartbeat. A young tyrant greedy for the lavish trappings of power, he craved to take everything that looked monumental and expensive. His heavy hands snatched the brilliant pile of sweat, glistening so richly in the sunlight. But when the Thunderer sank his fingers into it, his triumph abruptly snapped. Beneath the thin shell of an appealing form hid the dead, naked rock of bone. Olympus went dead silent in shock. Zeus's gaze grew heavy like a thundercloud, and a cruel grin froze on his lips, masking the shame of a humiliated dictator just exposed as a laughingstock before his entire subservient entourage. The trap slammed shut. Prometheus didn't just outsmart him, he publicly shattered the myth of the new god-king's omniscience. The fury that scorched Zeus's chest was the fury of a slighted tyrant whose authority had cracked on the very first day of peace. And to wash away this shame and prove that his sheer force outweighed Promethean intellect, Zeus no longer needed laws. He needed total, full-scale vengeance. Prometheus understood the fallout. His own cursed foresight left no room for illusions. The Titan knew full well that Zeus would buy into the glitter, and he took the step deliberately. It was a pure triumph of intellect over animal greed. Prometheus knew the sky would close, and ahead lay centuries of his flesh being ripped apart on the Caucasian crags, because tyrants never forgive the witnesses of their own myopia. But this move was necessary to show humanity. The gods are not all-knowing. They can and must be defeated by the mind. The word of the Lord of Olympus was absolute. Zeus couldn't change his choice in front of his retinue, so he smelted his own impotence into a devastating punishment. The sky above the earth slammed shut with a roar. By his decree, the Thunderer sealed the sacred flame inside the palaces of Olympus, stripping mortals of their only source of heat and defense. The human herd was cast into a primordial deaf night. The world went stiff, the air turned into an ice blade, and the scorched earth frosted over, leaving humanity to slowly freeze to death in the dirt without a shred of hope for salvation. Part 2. The theft of the spark and the curse of civilization. The first true winter crashed down upon the earth, a long, ruthless night soaked in the icy breath of death. Starved of light and warmth, people froze in their burrows, turning into statues of ice. Predators, sensing the helplessness of the bipeds, dragged them straight out of the dark, shredding them alive. Humanity was teetering on the absolute brink of extinction. Prometheus decided on open rebellion, on a crime that carried no pardon. The Titan sliced a long, dry stalk of giant fennel, concealing inside it a soft, porous pith, capable of holding a smoldering death for hours. Secretly, like a thief, he crept into the subterranean forge of his old friend Hephaestus, where amidst the smog soot and the crash of iron, he stole a spark from his red-hot anvil. Hiding this little sun inside the stalk, Prometheus descended to the frozen earth. He sparked the first bonfire. At first, the people scattered into the darkness in raw panic, howling in fear of the fiery beast. But the Titan himself walked into the flames, bent it to his will, and forced the humans to reach their hands out to the heat. This wasn't just a fire to warm the body, it was the fire of knowledge, a spark of madness that permanently altered the course of history. Prometheus taught them not to run from the element, but to steer it. The Titan stayed among the humans for long years, burning the animalistic submission right out of their nature and mutating them into something far more dangerous. He shoved their hands deep into the bowels of the earth, teaching them to rip copper, iron, and gold from the dirt, to melt that metal in the fire and forge weapons to slaughter their own kind, and plows to tear open the soil. Prometheus made humans build monumental stone boxes and wooden crypts to hide from the night's terrors, instead of huddling in damp, primordial caves. He revealed to them the terrifying, cold power of numbers and letters, teaching them to pin down their thoughts and pass this curse of memory to their descendants. Even the sky was no longer a secret. The Titan showed them the indifferent drifting of the stars, making them count the seasons and tick off the days to the approach of their own death. Mutilated bodies won a reprieve when Prometheus taught them to squeeze venom and juices from herbs to artificially prolong life. Finally, he broke the will of wild bulls, yoking them in heavy wood for grueling labor, and built the first ships with linen wings, floating coffins that allowed men to cross black, watery abysses. Humanity mutated. It rapidly rose from the mud, wiping the blood and ash from its face. It stopped praying and no longer wished to hinge on the bloody whims of Olympus. It was becoming proud, predatory, and lethally dangerous. Part 3: The Revenge of Olympus and the Anatomy of Pandora. When Zeus peered down from the height of his throne and saw that the night earth no longer belonged to him, but was blanketed in the thousands of fires of human civilization, his wrath smelted into a cold, calculated revenge. He realized you couldn't just burn humans out with a simple thunderstorm anymore. They had gotten too strong. They had to be made to destroy themselves by their own will. The Thunderer decided to pay Prometheus back in his own coin. He ordered Hephaestus to sculpt from filthy water and dust a girl of staggering beauty, one who looked like an immortal goddess on the outside, but was hollow on the inside. Just as Prometheus wrapped rotten bones in shiny fat, Zeus wrapped a ruinous void in lavish flesh. Every one of the gods left their bloody fingerprint on this instrument. Aphrodite draped her in a sickly allure. Athena wove her a shroud of gorgeous clothing. Hermes planted a flattering tongue and a cunning mind between her lips. They named her Pandora, she who bears all gifts. Prometheus, whose gift of foresight acted as a constant feed of internal agony, saw through the play instantly. He tracked down his brother Epimetheus and in a rage ordered him never, under any circumstances, to accept gifts from the Lord of Olympus and to kick any of his messengers right back to the sky. But when Hermes walked Pandora to Epimetheus's doorstep, the Titan, blinded by her otherworldly appearance, forgot every warning. He let the girl into his house and took her as his wife, completely oblivious that the real threat was already waiting inside his own home. In the darkest corner of their dwelling stood a massive, sealed jar, piled over with dust and rocks, a toxic trap left by the gods, which Prometheus knew about and had strictly forbidden anyone to ever touch. Fermenting inside this vessel were incurable plagues, crushing poverty, eye-eating envy, and the vices that push brother to turn on brother. Pandora, driven by a sickly, overpowering curiosity deliberately wired into her brain by Zeus, quickly found the stash. While her husband slept, she walked up to the abandoned vessel and with one easy motion tore off the lid. In that exact second, thousands of invisible winged monstrosities erupted from the jar's black throat. Sickness, pain, anguish, and death draped the planet in a black shroud, poisoning every drop of water, every gulp of air. Pandora, in raw terror, tried to force the lid back on, and the heavy cover slammed shut with a crash, pinning the very last creature at the absolute bottom of the jar. By the will of Zeus, only hope remained locked away down there, and herein lay the cruel design of Olympus. She didn't manage to break out into the world completely, but in those few seconds, the jar stood open, her phantom spirit still managed to seep through the crack and crawl under humanity's skin. That essence lodged itself permanently in human hearts, but there was disastrously too little of it to actually improve the lives of the slaves or change their damned fate. Ever since hope devolved into the heaviest sickness of the spirit, it feels like it's there inside, but it's really not. Humans have just enough of this microscopic fraction of divine spirit not to drop dead from instantaneous despair, but never enough to finally get up off their knees. It only lulls them to sleep with sweet illusions of the future, forcing them to submissively drag their bloody chains, instead of taking one decisive knife strike to cut this endless carnival of pain short. Part 4. The Caucasian Punishment. Humanity received its sentence and slowly rotted in the convulsions of the bizarre diseases unleashed by Pandora. The gods' objective was met. Mortals were broken from the inside. Now the entirety of the Thunderer's fury locked onto a single target: Prometheus. Zeus summoned his personal executioners, strength and power, entities stripped of faces and pity. With them he dispatched Hephaestus, whose hands were meant to forge this sentence in metal. They dragged the Titan to the absolute edge of the known world, to the savage, naked, glaciated crags of the Caucasus. It was a place where life had never existed, only the howling wind and ice-cold rock. Hephaestus twisted internally with pain, for Prometheus had once been his only friend among the Olympian scum, and now he was a victim of his own craft. However, an animalistic terror of Father Zeus's wrath burned away whatever nobility he had left. They crucified Prometheus on the vertical face of the cliff. Hephaestus hoisted his heavy hammer and forged chains of black iron bolting the Titan's arms and legs to the rock so tight he couldn't twitch a single finger. But for Zeus, this wasn't enough. He wanted absolute immobility for his prisoner. By his order, Hephaestus took a massive, unforgiving iron spike and with one terrifying swing of the hammer, drove it straight through Prometheus's ribcage, forever nailing his living flesh right to the heart of the Caucasian cliff. The Titan didn't make a sound. Not a single groan slipped through his clenched teeth, while the metal shredded his muscle. He just silently stared at his butchers with profound contempt. And even when strength, power, and a blood-spattered Hephaestus walked away, leaving him to the mercy of the elements, Prometheus didn't drop a single word. He met every Caucasian night in an icy silence, staring at the indifferent stars. Every morning, the first bloody rays of the sun grazed the Caucasian peaks. A heavy shadow sliced the sky. A colossal eagle, Zeus's personal executioner. The bird dropped like a stone onto the chest of the crucified Titan. With its hooked, razor-sharp talons, it ripped open the healed skin, sank its bloody beak deep into his body, and tore out chunks of living liver. This horrific torture dragged on all day. The eagle only flew off when the sun dipped behind the horizon. Because Prometheus was an immortal entity of the old world overnight in total darkness, his wounds would hiss and seal, his flesh would knit back together, and his liver would fully regenerate only to be ripped apart again the very next morning. This loop of pure, concentrated pain lasted for centuries. Part 5. The Secret of the Underworld. Millennia bled away. Down on Earth, empires were built and demolished. Generations of humans were born in agony and crumbled to dust, and Prometheus hung on his cliff just the same. In the summer, the merciless sun incinerated his skin, baking it into dry scabs. In the winter, his body crusted over with a thick armor of ice. Zeus wasn't just punishing him. He was trying to snap that iron will. The Thunderer knew that locked inside Prometheus's head was a terrifying secret of the future, one that could annihilate Olympus. Centuries of torture didn't break Prometheus, and the hidden prophecy, which the Titan used to poison the Thunderer's mind via messengers over the years, morphed into a sword, dangling over Olympus. Zeus, who had already exposed his intellectual fragility to the Titan once before, was now in a sheer panic at the thought of playing the fool again. He realized he had backed himself into a corner. He was forced to keep his immortal prisoner on the surface and maintain this daily ritual, because it was the only way he kept a ghost of a chance to rip the knowledge of how to save his throne from the prisoner's mouth. One day, unable to stomach the suspense, Zeus dispatched his herald Hermes to the Caucasus. The sycophantic god approached the crucified Titan, pitching a deal. Name the woman who will bear a son whose power will eclipse Zeus's, and hurl him from the throne. In return, Hermes promised freedom, a pardon, and a golden seat on Olympus. Prometheus lifted his head, dripping with blood mixed with ice, and his answer hit like an axe. "I despise your master and his whole cowardly breed. I'd rather rot on this rock for another 1,000 epochs than act the dog at Zeus's feet. Let him hurl his lightning. Let him crash these mountains down on my head. He won't tear a single word from my mouth." Enraged by this response, Zeus unleashed his most catastrophic lightning bolt into the cliff. The Caucasian mountain split dead down the middle, and Prometheus, along with tons of rock and iron chains, plummeted underground into the pitch-black chasms of Hades' subterranean realm. The Thunderer condemned him to age-long isolation in the rotting silence of the afterlife, hoping the eternal cold and the crushing pressure of the Earth's crust would finally burn the seer's pride out of him. Ages passed, but the secret inside the prisoner's head remained a noose around Olympus's neck. When the sticky terror of the future finally overpowered the god-king's fury, Zeus was forced to drag the Titan back from subterranean oblivion. By his order, the captive was hauled up from the bleak domains of Hades back to the Caucasian crags, just to reboot the daily grind of torture. The Lord needed him on the surface, closer to his throne, where every strike of the beak left Olympus at least a phantom chance of tearing the name of its own demise from the prisoner's lips. Part 6. Heracles and the Illusion of Freedom. The arrival of Heracles in the Caucasus was the final move on the gods' hidden chessboard. Olympus was in a frantic panic for the prisoner to be freed to neutralize the threat, but they desperately needed to stage it as the brazen rogue action of a demigod, so the rest of the immortal rabble wouldn't catch the scent of the throne's fear and weakness. Prometheus, whose foresight tracked this move perfectly through the strata of ages, waited in silence for the arrival of Hellas's greatest butcher. The Titan knew the hero, famous for his brutal labors, was just a blind tool in a game where Zeus was forced to buy back his own safety at the cost of grudging concessions. Cresting the iced-over summit, the son of Zeus bore witness to the frozen Caucasian horror. the mutilated Titan, and the massive eagle which at that exact second was shrieking as it ripped long strings of meat fiber from the gaping chest cavity. Heracles slipped the bow from his shoulder. A hiss of torn air, and the arrow soaked in the black venom of the Lernaean hydra, an acid that ate through even the flesh of gods, punched through the bird's heart. With a death rattle, the eagle plummeted into the bottomless abyss, leaving behind nothing but stench and feathers. Heracles walked up to the crucified one and ripped the spike straight out of his chest, meat and all, and then tore the iron shackles out of the cliff by their roots. The heavy chains crashed onto the stone. The great Titan, whose feet touched the earth for the first time in millennia, reclaimed his physical freedom. Up on Olympus, Zeus waited, paralyzed in anticipation of his reward. The Thunderer thought he had finally outplayed the Titan, but Prometheus didn't beg for forgiveness and showed zero weakness. He threw the name of the sea nymph Thetis at Zeus like a bone to a dog. This was no payment for freedom, no admission of defeat. It was a final devastating strike of intellect. The goddesses of fate, the blind Moirai, had spun the prophecy long ago. The son of Thetis would be vastly stronger than his father, and if that father turned out to be Zeus, the Olympian throne would be reduced to ash. Hearing this, the Thunderer hastily married the nymph off to a mortal hero, Peleus, from whose union Achilles was later born. The crown of Olympus was saved from immediate collapse, but absolute carefree power was gone forever. By forcing Zeus to surrender the goddess to a mortal, Prometheus single-handedly locked Olympus in a cage of eternal paranoid terror. From now on, any nymph or mortal woman the king of gods might want to approach could secretly be carrying his death. The Thunderer realized his tyranny now rested strictly on the exceptional permission of a prisoner he had never managed to break. But the most terrifying thing for Olympus was Heracles himself and humans. Staring up at the empty sky, Zeus understood the main thing. A mortal creature armed with Promethean metal and knowledge was capable of annihilating the divine will. The trap had slammed shut for good. Yet one last formality remained. Zeus had once sworn by the rotting waters of the Styx that Prometheus would be chained to the Caucasian cliff for eternity, and the word of the Lord couldn't be rolled back without losing face in front of the Olympian scum. Just to demonstrate his absolute superiority, the Titan himself dictated the terms of this final farce. On his instruction, Hephaestus forged a heavy iron ring out of the scraps of the chain, setting a shard of Caucasian rock into it. Prometheus slipped this ring onto his finger. Wherever he walked, he remained formally chained to the Caucasus. The oath was kept in word only, but this iron band became not a mark of the Titan's submission but a symbol of Zeus's capitulation, a mute reminder that from then on, the Olympian throne held up solely by the grace of the unbreakable seer. Humans, though, whose minds remained permanently poisoned by the Titan's gifts, twisted this triumph of will into just another farce. Misinterpreting the trophy as a symbol of slavery to fate, they began mimicking it, wearing rings with stones, voluntarily branding themselves with the marks of an invented submission. They founded torch relays, screaming as they passed the stolen spark to one another, totally oblivious to the fact that this fire was just lighting up their own march to the grave under the watchful eye of hope. And the gods up above looked down in silence at this carnival, hiding a cold sweat behind mocking smiles, flinching every single time Prometheus slowly twisted the heavy Caucasian stone on his finger.